The following podcast is an exclusive presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Hey folks, Brian Keene here. You know, summer's over. We're entering the fall and then the winter. Halloween's coming up, Thanksgiving, and then, of course, the holiday shopping season. Speaking of the holiday shopping season, let me tell you about subculturecorsets.com. They've got everything you need for everyone on your list for this holiday season. Clothing, accessories, gifts, books, you name it, they've got it. They sponsor every show on the Project Entertainment Network, including this one. So please give them your business. Visit subculturecorsets.com.
Three Guys with Beards, the Project Entertainment Network store, featuring t-shirts, mugs, stickers, hoodies and more from your favorite Project Entertainment Network podcasts.
Ink stains, Scribbler's Rest.
The Horror Show with Brian Keene. Why not show your loyalty by wearing a cool product from the podcast group and show off to your friends?
It Cooks.
Armcast.
The Mondo Method Monster Attack.
Necrocastical. Go to projectentertainmentnetwork.com and click on the store tab for more details.
The Liars Club Podcast. Pizza.
The Lunch Ladies Book Club.
Matters of Faith.
The Project Entertainment Network store, stacked with stuff from the best podcasts on the internet. The Curtain Jerkers.
Buttercup of Doom.
www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
There shall come a podcast like no other. Defenders Dialogue with Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Marvel Comics' original superhero non-team convenes once again. The Incredible Hulk, the Savage Submariner, the Master of the Mystic Arts, Doctor Strange, and a dynamic supporting cast of Marvel superheroes battle against evil as the Defenders. Without further ado, true believers, here's your hosts, Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Excelsior!
Hi, welcome back to Defenders Dialogue. I'm Brian Keene.
And I'm Christopher Golden.
And today we are going to be focusing on Giant Size Defenders issue number 4 and the legendary Sons of the Serpent saga from Defenders issue 22 through 25. There's a lot to unpack here, including the first appearance of another classic member of the Defenders Rogues Gallery, a certain elf with a gun.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting and ongoing conversation about the elf with a gun. It's also going to be, Brian, the one time I feel like, maybe not the only time considering it's Gerber, but one of the only times that we sort of break out of talking about the 1970s and get a little into politics.
I agree.
So fair warning for those of you who listen to this podcast, but I think that you can't talk about the Sons of the Serpent arc without talking about 2017. But suffice to say, we begin with Giant Size Defenders number 4. And you know I say, Excelsior, true believers. Written by Steve Gerber. Drawn by Don Heck with inks by Vince Coletta.
Yep.
This is a really interesting, it's a really interesting issue, a really interesting Giant Size, because once again we get this thing where Gerber sort of clearly doesn't want the MacGuffin of the superhero fight and puts it in begrudgingly.
Yes.
So we open with Kyle Richmond, a.k.a. Nighthawk, out on a date with his supermodel girlfriend Trish Starr,
who we met in last week's episode of the podcast.
Exactly. And then the short version of this is that they're at some kind of red carpet event, although it's in the middle of a snowstorm, and Kyle and Trish get into Kyle's car, and the car explodes.
That's right. Somebody has put a car bomb inside this one percenter's vehicle.
Yeah.
And then we switch to the hospital where, and again, we talked last week about Gerber really began to humanize these characters and make them a family. We're at the hospital a half hour later, and Doctor Strange and Valkyrie show up, wanting to, of course, check on Kyle's status and Trish's status. It turns out that the surgeon, who is Is he working on Kyle or is he working on Trish? I can't remember.
I think he's working on. That's a good question. I'm looking at it now. I think he was working on. We read these last week.
Yep, here it is. He's working on Nighthawk.
That's what I thought. So.
Yep, and he wants Doctor Strange to help. Now remember, going back to our first episode and Doctor Strange's origins, he was a surgeon until he lost the use of his hands. What this surgeon, this peer of his wants him to do is to help supervise in the operating room. So he's in there, and there's a really great sequence. Again, we talked last week about, Gerber wasn't writing comics. He was almost writing prose. And here's another example of that. As far as the caption boxes go, he really, really digs into Stephen Strange's psyche. And, you see beads of sweat on Strange's forehead. He's behind the surgical mask, and he's getting stressed out. And his mind turns to wanting justice for his friend Nighthawk. And, he's thinking about calling the Defenders together, the Hulk, Submariner, Silver Surfer, maybe even Luke Cage, Daredevil, the Son of Satan, and Hawkeye.
Right. And he's thinking about which of them would come. And he's not sure about any of them, but he's sure about the Hulk. He's sure the Hulk would come. And this is interesting to me, Brian, actually, because, we'll talk in the next issue. I want to talk a little bit more about Gerber as a realist, which Steve Englehart talks about in his intro to Marvel Masterworks Defenders to Volume 4. But the other thing, aside from his realism, that I find really interesting, and I connect with Gerber on this basis, is that he's not just a realist in his writing style, but he's a pragmatist in the way he constructs story. He doesn't like to skip steps. So the fact that we'd previously seen that Doctor Strange at one point had been so focused on the Hulk that Hulk had sort of heard a psychic summons from him, even though Strange hadn't intended that to happen.
Right.
That happens again here, where Strange is so focused on the Hulk that the Hulk actually sort of hears a summons from Strange that he knows that Strange wants him to be there, and he comes and smashes through the hospital wall. And we have a moment where, when Hulk explains, Doctor Strange realizes that this is what's happened. So Gerber has put in the connective tissue, rather than just sort of set it up and have it be like, hey, it's comics, anything can happen in comics. He goes through the steps of showing the characters, establish it, and realize that this is what's happening. And a lot of comic book writers, especially in the 70s, would never have taken the time to do that.
Yet Gerber was absolutely an originator when it came to that form of storytelling in comics.
Yeah.
And again, I know we've said this in previous episodes, but the continued humanization of the Hulk, that's apparent here. Magician will take Hulk to Bird Nose. Hulk wants to see friend. Friend is sick. Here it is now solidified. They're not a non-team any longer. They are, in fact, friends. They're family. So yeah, just wonderful, wonderful prose work there by Gerber.
Yeah, no, it's really excellent. Then we skip ahead to Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne watching TV. A movie which I want to see now, Brian, called Zombie in a Girl's Dormitory.
If you listen to S.T. Yoshi, that could be the title of everything I've ever written, Chris.
I believe that you should write a novella called Zombie in a Girl's Dormitory and dedicate it to him.
I think I might.
I think you have to at this point. And the best part about that, Brian, is that way more people would read even a limited edition of Zombie in a Girl's Dormitory than anything he has ever written. Anyway, so we go on to Hank Pym realizing that their viewing of Zombie in a Girl's Dormitory is interrupted by the news about the bombing of the car of Kyle Richmond, and so Hank Pym realizes that he needs to get involved.
Right. The reason he needs to get involved, it turns out Trish Starr, Nighthawk's girlfriend, is actually the niece of a supervillain known as Egghead.
We use the term supervillain really loosely here.
Evil genius.
Evil genius, yes.
Known as Egghead. Now, Egghead, I can't remember, Chris. This is his first appearance in Defenders, correct?
Yes.
We haven't talked about him. Okay.
Right.
But, of course, you and I both are familiar with him. Egghead was always sort of the main villain for Hank Pym and his various incarnations as, Yellow Jacket, Ant-Man, Giant Man.
Which I think is one of the reasons that Hank Pym was never really, truly a massively respected superhero, even in any of his guises, because all he could muster for his rogues gallery was fucking Egghead.
It's like a rejected Dick Tracy villain.
Oh, well, all of the Headmen are rejected Dick Tracy villains. All right, but we're jumping ahead here. So Egghead. Egghead is living in the Bowery, in a homeless shelter, and he's such a loser that he gets his ass kicked by a bunch of the guys at the homeless shelter and thrown out. And then we get to Chapter 2, Flight of the Yellow Jacket, which is a terrible, terrible title.
It is. Now, for our younger listeners who only know the Marvel characters through the TV shows and the movies, Yellow Jacket is, of course, another incarnation of Hank Pym. You know him from the films as... Well, I guess in the films he's Scott Lang.
He in the films, Hank Pym is played by Michael Douglas,
right?
As the elder Ant-Man who passes on his suit to Paul Rudd as Scott Lang.
Right.
But in the current comics continuity, they coexist. And Hank Pym is Yellow Jacket, Ant-Man, Giant Man, and also a swashbuckling, trench-coated superhero called Dr. Pym. Yeah, man, I'll tell you. Listen, I didn't mean to turn this into a shit on Hank Pym conversation, because I actually have always really liked that character in all of his different incarnations, as long as he wasn't slapping Janet Van Dyne.
Yeah, his wife beating version in the 80s left something to be.
Yes, that's when Tony Stark decided to be an alcoholic, or when they decided to make Tony Stark an alcoholic, they decided Hank Pym's tragic flaw was that he would beat up his wife now and again. So it's hard to forget that.
But we're not there yet. This is still 1975.
Yes, this is the 1970s where they haven't wrecked Hank Pym yet. Okay,
right. So yeah,
Hank
he
Pym
shows up.
Go ahead.
He shows up at the hospital, and he wants to check on Trish Starr's status, and he finds out that the Hulk was there with a doctor. He assumes that the doctor might have been Egghead.
Right. We also need to establish and say that Trish Starr has actually lost an arm in this explosion. Yes,
which is an important plot point that we will come back to later in the Defenders.
Yes. But before we get to that, Brian, we need to discuss the page in which Doctor Strange and Valkyrie in civilian garb are visiting Nighthawk post-surgery, and they've left the Hulk in a trench coat and hat, with no shoes, obviously, standing in the snow outside, holding Aragorn's tether.
Right.
Sorry.
Now, if you're new to the show, Aragorn is Valkyrie's horse. He's a winged horse. He's a Pegasus.
So they've left the Hulk outside, holding on to Aragorn, and a police officer comes running up and says, "Hold it right there, Mac. What do you think you're doing?" Because just the fact that Hulk has a hat on somehow makes him not look like the Hulk. And the Hulk says, "Why is Blue Man yelling at?" And he doesn't even need to finish his sentence. "Don't smart off at me, wise guy. Can't you read? You're in a no parking zone, and that goes for horses if that thing is a horse. Come on, pal, move along. I don't want to have to get nasty." And then Hulk, in a fury, says, "Horse is friend." And that, of course, leads to the Hulk trying to smash Blue Man.
But what's interesting about this, in the past, the Defenders would have had to resort to force to get Hulk to stand down.
Right.
Twice in this issue, we've seen just Valkyrie and Doctor Strange talking to him. and they're able to now reason with the big green brute. Doctor Strange tells him, put him down. He's only doing his job, and Hulk puts him down and listens. So again, it's more characterization, more development here.
Right.
So then, with Hulk's cover blown, he busts out of his trench coat, and Doctor Strange drops the spell that conceals him and Valkyrie's uniforms, and they take off into the night.
All right, well, I'm going to summarize the next bit, which basically is that Yellow Jacket had thought that Egghead was dead. He tracks Egghead down. He thinks Egghead is responsible for the bomb that blew up Trish Star, and he goes and he beats on him, and then Nighthawk thinks that it was actually the Squadron Supreme, who he thought was dead, or the Squadron Sinister. I always make that mistake. Who he thought was dead. And so the Defenders go to track down the Squadron Sinister, and even though only this suspicion is what makes them think these guys might be alive, of course, it being Marvel Comics, they are alive. And then there's a pointless battle.
Right.
So I don't want to spend time on the pointless battle with the Squadron Sinister.
We do need to point out one thing. Before the pointless battle takes place, this is something Gerber was also a master of, was foreshadowing.
Right.
The Marvel formula back then, if you were writing issue number 50, you would foreshadow maybe issue number 51.
Right.
Gerber would foreshadow shit, 6-8 issues ahead of time. As evidenced here, he has the Squadron Sinister talking. Now, you'll remember from their previous appearance, we talked about they teamed up with Nebulon, the Celestial Man.
Right.
We learn here that Nebulon is living among something or someone called the Ludberdites. And there's a little asterisk that says, about whom we'll learn more in a future issue, I promise, SG for Steve Gerber. And we do, but it's like 6 issues away from here. Right. So, I mean, this guy had shit plotted out.
Yeah. He knew where he was going. Anyway, the Defenders, as seems to always happen, get captured. That Nighthawk shows up. Yellow Jacket shows up to rescue them, along with the astral form of Doctor Strange. They manage to incite Bruce Banner to become the Hulk again, which is how they escape. Nighthawk, the moon rises, and at the nighttime, Nighthawk is twice the strength of an ordinary man, and he basically gets out of his bed to try to help his friends. The Squadron Sinister arrive. This is, again, I hate to sound bored by the battle with the Squadron Sinister, but I am. Because in this giant size issue, it is much less. It's not just that the character stuff is more interesting. It's that in this case, the superhero battle stuff is a total MacGuffin, not even part of the plot, really.
Exactly. You can tell Gerber had to follow the Marvel formula and include it.
Right.
You can see what he was having fun writing and what he wrote because he had to.
Right.
Because it changes again after the battle. We get an epilogue where, Nighthawk is out of the hospital, Trish is out of the hospital, and, she's feeling sorry for herself. She's talking about how she can't play piano or paint anymore, and, nobody's going to want a one-armed model. And they basically break up. And, and just the dialogue, it's far more fascinating and endearing and a pleasure to read than anything from the 6 pages of fight scene that preceded it.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. I mean, the moment that I thought was the best on that page, this is a 1-page epilogue, which we won't recap the whole thing. But, Trish wants to go. She's leaving town because she has to sort of start to redefine a life that has been changed completely. Obviously, she's been a supermodel, and now she's missing an arm. She's sort of trying to figure out what she's going to do with her life. And Kyle's saying it doesn't matter, and she says it has to matter. You wouldn't be human otherwise. And he's basically saying all the right things, like, look, stay. You're wrong. And I love this. And she says, "Am I? Then look me in the eye and tell me you love me, Kyle. Ask me to marry you, to stay with you forever." And then he's like, "That's not fair. I'm not ready to commit myself like that to anyone." And then she's like, "Well, it's all been said then. Goodbye." She's not, she's not being difficult. She's basically saying, "Look, unless, like, if he loved her so much that he wanted to marry her before this, then that's fine." But she's saying, like, don't change your mind now. Like, don't, Anyway, I'm not saying this eloquently, but Gerber does.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and then for those of you, we're not going to recap them, but for those of you who do have the Masterworks or have access to them, you have this this great bonus at the end, which we won't recap, which is you get the origin stories of Dr. Arthur Nagin, aka Gorilla Man, Dr. Gerald Morgan, who we talked about these three guys last week, and
aka the Headmen.
The Headmen, yes, and Chandra the Mystic. So you get those origin stories from their original Golden Age publications in the back of this Masterworks. So that's a nice little bonus there. And then, Brian, what do you want to say about Sons of the Serpent?
Well, I want to start by, and I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but it was the 70s. This was 1975.
Yeah.
Now, I talked on a previous show about, everything I learned about race growing up in rural Pennsylvania in 1975. The only people of color I saw were, Gordon on Sesame Street and Luke Cage.
Right.
We didn't have people of color living around here. All I knew about race relations was that my father's best friend in Vietnam was black, and when the two of them came home, they still were enlisted, and they ended up on riot duty in Detroit, where my father's friend was spit on by fellow black men and called an Uncle Tom. And I'm, I guess, 6 years old at the time, so I don't understand what any of this means, and my father wouldn't go on to explain it to me.
Right.
And Gordon on Sesame Street wasn't really explaining it to me either. Where I started to learn about this shit was Steve Gerber. His run in the Man-Thing. There's a classic issue where it's a black escaped convict and a white Southern sheriff, and they're both racist. They both hate each other for who they are, and they come into conflict in the Man-Thing swamp, and that blew my little mind. But then this particular storyline, the Sons of the Serpent, I wasn't lucky enough to buy them on the newsstand, but I found them the same year I discovered the Defenders. I found them in the back issue box at the flea market, and I bought the whole run. And I remember, I don't want to call it a social awakening because, I'm a 6-year-old kid.
Right.
But I remember the impact it had on me, showing me a world outside of, bumfuck Pennsylvania.
Right. I didn't realize that was your hometown. That's a...
Yep, that's the official name. Welcome to Bumfuck.
Welcome to Bumfuck. Population me. So the interesting thing, right? So first of all, we should say the Sons of the Serpent storyline starts in Defenders 22, written by Gerber, drawn by laid out by Sal Buscema, and the finished art is by Mike Esposito. Phenomenal art in these issues. And the fascinating thing, we talked. This Marvel Masterworks Volume 4 is introduced by Steve Englehart because by the time this material was collected, sadly Steve Gerber had passed away at the age of 60.
Right.
So Englehart writes the introduction and it talks about Gerber and their friendship and Gerber's work and the sort of realism that Gerber strove for. And it's so evident in this. And the other thing I want to say about this before we get into the plot is that when I was reading this, I was like, this is only issue 22, because in my mind, the book didn't get this good or this interesting. I mean, I always loved it, but in my mind, it was later that we got to this point. But we're only at issue 22 of this thing. And this, to me, as great as the stuff has come before, the stuff that came before was, this is where it really takes off for me.
Exactly.
And so we open with Valkyrie walking down a deserted, rundown street in Harlem with boarded up windows in some of the tenement buildings. She comes upon, and again, we could go on and on about the great narration in the caption boxes on these pages. But she's walking along the street and she hears a fight going on in an alley between two guys. And the one thing I do want to pull out, she says she hears grunts, hisses, the clack of metal against metal, even on so bitter a night as this. Tempers may flare, passions may burn, men may die. And I know that there's a ton of melodrama in that, but man, when I read this thing, it worked on me.
Absolutely.
Even now, it works on me.
Absolutely.
You know. So then these guys are trying to kill each other with small knives. She interferes. She's a white woman in Harlem, and these guys are African American and or Latino, and I say that only because the dialogue from one of them implies that he speaks Spanish. And then they sort of are still trying to kill each other while they're attacking her, and she draws her sword and she puts an end to it.
Right. Then she stumbles across a tenement building.
Right.
This is sort of, we could subtitle this "Valkyrie Gets Woke."
Yeah, exactly. She hears a scream from this building.
Yeah. She's seen these two men fighting. She's intervened in that. Then she hears a scream in a tenement building, goes in, and this woman's baby is in the crib being attacked by a rat.
A rat the size of a cat. And again, Brian, rereading those 2 pages, I was taken back. Like, I remember this moment. So, like, last episode, I talked about the moment Hulk flicks the little alien troll guy.
Yep.
Or whatever he was. In a very different way, I remember this moment so clearly reading it, where Valkyrie comes in, and I was as horrified as she was at the idea that this huge rat is in the crib with this child.
Oh, I was too. I mean, I remember the next page. The woman is explaining to Valkyrie, there'll be other rats. If not rats, roaches.
Right.
Valkyrie points out they don't have any heat in the building. The woman says, "How can I live under any other conditions?" She talks about welfare and that she eats dog food so that her baby can have milk. And, none of this, I wasn't seeing any of this on Sesame Street, let alone the Rogers Neighborhood.
No, and again, as a kid, actually, this kind of topic would not be covered on television that children would be allowed to watch.
No.
But you could open up this issue of the Defenders and really look at it and see situations that you hadn't been really exposed to before.
Right.
So in any case, we'll talk more about this as we go.
What Gerber does, I don't know if you noticed this or not, it's a nice contrast. We go from the absolute poverty and despair of Valkyrie in this tenement to...
Sorry.
Is that you?
Go ahead.
To Kyle Richmond's penthouse. Remember, Kyle Richmond's a millionaire. Or I guess it's not his penthouse, but it's somebody's party on the fashionable.
Yeah, he's at a party. Sort of Park Avenue people are at, and a young woman, also a woman of means, named Ginny, who he clearly has a friendship with. He's moping about Trish having left, which happened in the giant size, and she's basically saying, "Look, you don't have to have this life." And then Kyle Richmond is approached by a guy named Harold Holloman, a real estate tycoon who's clearly a low-life piece of crap and wants to take some of these tenement buildings and tear them down so he can turn them into something else. And Kyle says, "Go talk to Pennyworth, my business manager, basically, who runs his company." And again, I want to take this moment to say we're going to get political in this issue because I found it, Brian, impossible to get even this far in this story without thinking so much about 2017 and about this scene reminds me so much of Trump. It's the Park Avenue real estate tycoons and all this kind of stuff. And again, I don't want to get into anybody who knows anything about me or follows me on social media knows my feelings about Trump, so we won't talk about him. But subject matter wise, it's amazing to me that with some tweaking to make the dialogue less antiquated, you could publish this comic right now, and it would be maybe even more pertinent to what's going on in the world than it was in 1975 or whatever year this was.
Time is a flat circle, and history repeats itself.
You need to say that, though, in a drawl, though. Time is a flat circle. Anyway, so Kyle leaves the party.
One thing important to note before we move on from that scene, once again, Kyle shows that he's not interested in the minutia of his empire. He doesn't care about his investments. He advises Mr. Holloman to deal with Pennyworth.
Right.
Now, we've talked about how Nighthawk is Marvel's version of Batman. Pennyworth is his version of Alfred. It's important to note, we have not seen Pennyworth up to this point. We've only seen him in shadow.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. We're going to find out later. But
yes.
He says Pennyworth handles all of his financial affairs.
Yeah. So we go to Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum, and we find a very interesting... So Nighthawk leaves the party thinking he's going to go to Doctor Strange's place, which is so fascinating because you have this guy, Kyle Richmond, who has this whole other life, and yet he's starting to realize he only feels at home with these other outsiders.
Right.
Then we cut to Doctor Strange's place, and we see that Valkyrie has brought this woman, Elena, and her baby to Doctor Strange's place, where Clea is playing with the baby, and Hulk says, "Baby smiles makes Hulk happy." And then they start to have this conversation between Doctor Strange and Valkyrie, where Valkyrie is basically saying, "Look, did I do the right thing to bring her here?" But others still dwell there in that same loathsome state. And Doctor Strange, and again, there's only so much that you can do in a superhero comic to address this kind of situation. Because if these superheroes really existed, certainly one would hope that they would be doing more on a daily basis to help people in need. When there isn't a world-threatening crisis. But Doctor Strange says it is not within even our power to solve the problem, Val, but we may take certain steps in this particular instance. The conditions in Elena's building are intolerable and illegal. And so he's saying in the morning we're going to contact the landlord.
Right.
Then just as a side note, we should point out that we see a silhouetted figure outside the window watching. Nighthawk or Kyle Richmond shows up and chases him off.
And this figure seems to recognize Valkyrie.
Right, yeah.
Right. We'll come back to that later.
Yes, yeah, we'll come back to that.
But yeah, Kyle enters Doctor Strange's house. Doctor Strange welcomes him to their little party. And, Kyle's pretty down the dumps. They're talking. And then meanwhile, outside that slum where Valkyrie had visited.
Yeah, the same building that Elena lives in. And here we get another instance, Brian, of what Gerber does, because even rereading it. So we have a single page of this. The Sons of the Serpent shoot a fireball from some kind of cannon in through the window of an apartment. Amos Ferret. Sorry, I was just looking. Amos Ferret is the name of the old gentleman who lives in this apartment. It says that the building is filled by the old, the infirm, the blind, the black, the brown, yellow, and red of skin. Amos Ferret apparently is blind. He can't see the flames, but he can hear them. And the flames start to spread. And then in excruciating detail over the course of a couple of panels, Gerber talks about what's happening to this guy as the fire spreads in his apartment. And I'm thinking, the defenders will show up and save him. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, comics are a visual medium. The artwork does not show us Amos Ferret being burned alive.
Right.
But Gerber describes it in the caption boxes. And it's horrific.
It is horrific. I got to the page, I was like, oh shit. And I thought for a second, they must come and save him. This is when they intervene. And even 40 years later, or whatever it's been, I was horrified. And I'd forgotten, that, oh no, they don't get there in time. This guy burns to death.
Right. But the defenders do decide to go check out the tenement building for themselves. And when they arrive, of course, it's too late. It's already up in flames.
Right. So we can essentially what happens is that guy Holloman shows up, and he's blaming the tenants. It turns out he's the landlord, the guy who had wanted Kyle Richmond to finance some of his real estate dealings. He's the landlord of this tenement building, and he's accusing the tenants of having burned it down. The tenants obviously get furious. One of them grabs him, and here we see again, Holloman is obviously a racist son of a bitch.
I mean the dialogue, and I don't know that you could get away with this in comics today. Yeah, one of the residents of the apartment building, grabs him, accuses him of burning it down to collect the insurance, and Holloman says, "Don't you speak to me that way, you big black ape! Take your filthy hands off me!" and spits on him.
Right.
Which, justifiably enrages this tenant, and they begin beating Holloman.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, when that happens, Nighthawk, I think smartly, Nighthawk says, "Doc, they're angry enough to kill him. We've got to stop them for their sake as well as his." So right there, we have the implicit knowledge of the injustice in our society, right? That basically, even though this guy totally has it coming, and he just spit in this guy's face, that Nighthawk knows that there'll be no justice in this situation, right?
Right.
Anyway, they think that Holloman must be responsible for burning down the building because he wants to clear the way. Even Nighthawk knows that he wants to sort of tear these buildings down. But it turns out, no, it's the Sons of the Serpent. They show up and they say, and again, here we go, Brian. This is where I really, all I could think about was Charlottesville and all these places. Now, traitor, comes the hour of the serpent, the time of judgment, and we judge the white man innocent.
Yep.
While you, Birdman, have committed treason against your race. That sets up what we now see, and I'm not going to keep quoting, but we see a constant list of dialogue. I apologize to people listening. I should have moved this out of the room before.
I want to point out to our listeners, you don't hear this type of interruption on the Horror Show.
In any case, I'm not even going to go back to Yoshi. That's it. Anyway.
No. I mean, the Sons of the Serpent, they're an analogy for the Ku Klux Klan. But they're, this was 1975. Gerber was writing this. You're right about Charlottesville. This is straight up out of the alt-right's playbook.
Yeah. Everything they say,
Richard
honestly,
Spencer could be delivering these lines.
Everything they say could be from Stephen Miller or Richard Sherman or any of these guys. I mean, all of this dialogue that comes over the course of these 4 issues out of the mouths of the Sons of the Serpent literally could be written on some Breitbart post today.
But that dialogue backfires on the Sons of the Serpent. They say for 2 decades, this nation has felt the tyranny of the non-white minority. But no more. White and only white is beautiful.
I love this moment so much.
These words do not please a certain giant green behemoth. Hulk says, "Only white? Hulk is not white." Snake Men also hate Hulk. Hulk will smash them. As you should, Hulk.
That's right. As you should, Hulk. Hulk, listen, ladies and gentlemen listening to this podcast, the Incredible Hulk has just given you your marching orders. Always punch Nazis. The Incredible Hulk wants you to punch Nazis, okay? And then he proceeds to do just that.
Yep.
As do the rest of the Defenders. And it starts to escalate into what we say is sort of a full-scale riot, and the Sons of the Serpent scatter, and then we're on to Defenders 23.
Right. Defenders 23 begins with a recap of everything that has happened before.
As they so often do. And then that issue, by the way, we should say, is written by Gerber, drawn by Buscema, inked by Vince Colletta.
Right. And we find out, the Sons of the Serpent retreated, but 2 of them are following the Defenders back to Doctor Strange's house, and Yellow Jacket comes across them.
Yeah, which I find, I find it interesting, the way that Yellow Jacket, who really doesn't have the history of being somebody who patrols the city, I know he's on his way to Doctor Strange's place, but that he stumbles upon them is great, because it's this whole thing about how, in the Defenders, although the entire Marvel Universe at some point stumbles into this comic, it seems that, it's only the oddball characters who keep getting drawn into the sphere of influence of the Defenders.
Right.
Anyway, Yellow Jacket manages to take one of them captive. He shows up at Doctor Strange's place. Hulk is once again playing with the baby. Nice baby. Baby give big smile for Hulk and Bugman. Because that's Yellow Jacket, by the way. Bugman. So then they're trying to get the guy to speak, and he babbles on. We're an army, a great white army with battalions coast to coast in every major city. There are thousands of us, thousands, and nobody can stop our march. Not you, not the Avengers, not the police, not anybody. You'll see it midnight on television when the whole nation sees.
You will see our leader speak.
Yes.
And boy, if that isn't history ringing through the decades to today.
Yep, exactly. It's amazing. So then once again we see this figure outside the window, and this time they do capture him, and they run out to confront him, and we reveal, Brian, who is this peeping Tom?
This is none other than Jack Norris, Valkyrie's husband. Now, you'll remember from previous episodes, Valkyrie has an entire life that she did not remember, as Barbara Norris. And she had learned that she was married, and now we find out that this is her husband, Jack. And
go ahead.
He does not react to this well.
Yeah, well, the thing is that she doesn't even recognize him. She doesn't know anything about him. And her inability to access Barbara Norris's memories is incredibly troubling to her, painful to her, and she turns and goes back inside. They all go inside because it is now midnight, the time at which the Sons of the Serpent had promised, or this captured guy had promised, that their master would speak, and therefore we get an entire page of prose with one image, Brian, like we did once before in this series. And I'm not going to recap. The entire page is the speech by the leader, the supposed leader of the Sons of the Serpent. And man, again, anybody could go back and read this speech, and it is the insidiousness with which they make their case, where they make it sound like this is a reasonable or rational argument.
Inflation, unemployment, recession. The average American can't afford food or gas, fears losing their job, and whose fault is this?
Mm-hmm. Who are these parasites who would steal the bread and butter from the mouths of white children, who would take your job away from you? You know them. They're the neighbors you prayed you'd never have. They're black, red, brown, or yellow of skin. They worship at something called a synagogue instead of an American church. You could put mosque in there now.
Yep.
And literally, you might as well say in this speech, they sent us their rapists and murderers, and we need to build a wall.
Yep.
I mean,
anybody
who thinks that Brian and I are making more of this than it actually is, I implore you to actually go and read these issues, because we are actually almost downplaying how pertinent this story is, and this speech is. Like, literally, it's a campaign stump speech by the Sons of the Serpent.
Right. Now, one important thing from this prose page, they talk about the Supreme Serpent, the leader of the Sons of Serpent, how his voice is calm, assured, reasonable. But there's something else about it. Nighthawk feels a certain familiarity with the voice. He decides it must be the words, not the voice. But that's important, and we're going to come back to that later.
Right.
But, the speech ends, and Doctor Strange is, what are we supposed to do? And Hulk again, he has the right idea. You always punch Nazis. Hulk says, dumb magician doesn't know. Even Hulk knows. Snake men must be smashed.
Yes, exactly. And Nighthawk says, obviously. And then they have to find them. The house begins to shake. There's an explosion in Lower Manhattan. And basically they go off. Hulk and Yellow Jacket go off to try to help and deal with the explosion and the damage that's going on. Jack Norris sort of starts to try to talk to Valkyrie. You're going off with them, leaving me behind? Why? What can you do to help? You don't really believe you're some sort of Amazon. And she says, I'm no longer the woman you wed, Mr. Norris. Whatever vows we took must bind us no more. My place now can only be alongside the Defenders. And she and Nighthawk and Doctor Strange take to the sky. Hulk and Yellow Jacket are trying to save people. But when the Hulk smashes his hands together to create a wind to blow out this fire, he knocks Yellow Jacket to the ground. Yellow Jacket messes up his... And again, Brian, we come back to it. Why is Hank Pym kind of always a bit of a loser when superheroics are concerned?
He sprains
his ankle. I mean, just like, dude, come on. You'd never see the Hulk sprain his ankle or Luke Cage sprain his ankle. But just the idea that Gerber knows that Yellow Jacket is the kind of character who would sprain his ankle tells you everything you need to know.
And then, of course, injured, he is overcome by the Sons of the Serpent, who capture him.
Right. So then Strange and Valkyrie and Nighthawk go to Holloman's house. They think Holloman must be the guy who started this whole thing. But it turns out, of course, it wasn't him. And they believe him. Then Valkyrie and Hulk and the rest of them, they rejoin Hulk, who has now lost Yellow Jacket, who's been taken by the Sons of the Serpent. And there's a big fight with the Sons of the Serpent. Fight. The Sons of the Serpent basically capture everyone except the Hulk, who reverts to Bruce Banner.
Right.
And then we get, Brian, in issue 24, with Gerber writing, Buscema on art, and Bob McLeod on inks, we get what to me is, in a weird way, the beginning of the Defenders lineup that I like best.
Yeah.
Because even though we only get a hint of it, we've had them as guest stars before, but now Son of Satan, Daredevil, and Luke Cage show up as a team with the core membership. What's that?
Yep. As Defenders, because when the story opens, Doctor Strange, Valkyrie, Yellow Jacket, and Nighthawk are captured prisoners. Yes. And so, it's going to take a new team of Defenders to stop this. So we open with, the Sons of Serpent telling them their plan. Their plan is to basically burn down every ghetto and barrio in every major city across the United States. I'm not going to recap the whole thing. Basically, if you have any familiarity with the Turner Diaries, this is what they want to enact.
Well, and I have to say, what's fascinating about this is, and horrifying, I should say, about this, is their plan is to drive people of color out of the cities into the suburbs, where they think that the people of the suburbs, and prior to the election, I would have thought this was crazy, but now who knows, the people of the suburbs will be so horrified by the presence of so many people of color that they will rise up and murder them in the streets.
Yep, and then what we see is it's just one panel, but Sal Buscema, he really, really does a great job with this panel as far as conveying the horror. You see a suburban neighborhood, house on fire, and you see a bunch of white, everyday suburbanites standing with home weapons, deer rifles, baseball bats, over the bodies of several people of color. Yeah. Depicting, the end of this race war that the Sons of Serpent hope to inspire.
Yeah. Yeah, crazy. We should also note that they refer to the Defenders as white traitors throughout this issue. Anyway, they are stunned to find that the things that are holding the other Defenders captive are not strong enough to hold Valkyrie, because, of course, no woman could have escaped that. There must have been a crack in the metal because, she's a woman. Then Valkyrie is horrified. She's undone. She could have kicked the crap out of all of them and freed her companions, except she rips the hood off one of the Sons of the Serpent, and it's a woman. And because of the magic of the Enchantress, she's not allowed to strike a woman.
Right.
Which distracts her long enough that she gets shot in the back.
Not the last time Valkyrie will be shot in the back in this comic series.
Yeah, exactly. And and then she is recaptured at that point.
Right.
We cut away to Hulk. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, meanwhile, Bruce Banner has shown up at Doctor Strange's house. Now, remember, Banner can't always remember what the Hulk has been up to and vice versa, but he's positive the Defenders were captured, and he's telling Clay about this. And, Jack Norris is still there. Doctor Strange's sidekick Wong is still there. And Clea suggests, well, why don't we contact the other Defenders? Silver Surfer, Daredevil, Luke Cage, the Son of Satan, Submariner, and Hawkeye. We get acknowledgement here. They're not just people who show up on occasion. These are the other Defenders.
Right.
And she does just that. The first person she makes contact with is the Son of Satan.
Right.
Then Daredevil. Luke Cage she can't get a hold of, so Banner takes care of that with
actually what happens is that she's using magic she's not that familiar with, and it becomes too much for her. She actually passes out.
Right.
And then, so before she can contact the rest of them, but Bruce Banner's like, well, I don't know how to contact Namor or the Silver Surfer, but I can pick up the phone and call Hero for Hire Luke Cage. And when he explains to Cage that it's the Sons of the Serpent, Cage comes willingly because that's the problem he's dealing with as well. And I just want to say again, one of the things I love about these comics, Brian, is that on one particular page when Cage shows up at the door of Doctor Strange's home, who shows up right behind him but Daredevil, and though later they will be in the Defenders TV series together, and later in the Marvel Comics Universe continuity, we will see that they are constant friends and allies. This is the first time they've ever met.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, dude, I know it's a total... We said at the outset of this series that it was going to be a total geek fest. I totally geek out at those moments. Like, oh, this is great. This is the first time they've ever met.
Yep.
So...
Yeah, the name's Daredevil.
Yep.
And who? Depends. If you're spending money, it's Power Man, Hero for Hire. Otherwise, Luke Cage. And Daredevil says, oh, please, I've read about you, Mr. Cage. They have no history up until now.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen in the pages of Daredevil. It didn't happen in the pages of Hero for Hire. It happened in the Defenders.
Right.
Take that, Tom Snagowski.
Anyway, so they all arrive. There's a great several page sequence of the three of them arriving at Doctor Strange's home.
Because then Son of Satan pulls up. Now you got these two street level heroes.
Yeah.
And then Son of Satan pulls up on his flaming hellfire chariot,
led by demon horses.
Yeah, 3 demon horses.
But Son of Satan walks up and rings the doorbell. So
yeah.
Anyway, we go back to the captive Defenders. Yellow Jacket shrinks down to bug form, which apparently the Sons of the Serpent didn't know he could do. He escapes, but he's not strong enough to break the others out. So he goes to leave, and he discovers that they are actually... the base that they're in is actually underwater. They're under the Atlantic Ocean somewhere.
Yep.
And so that from his perspective, there's no escape. Back to Doctor Strange's place, the Son of Satan, and tries to get the captive Son of the Serpent to confess or to say where the base is. And he can't do that.
And when that doesn't work, Luke Cage tries his hand at it.
Right. So then, as that's all going on, Elena, the woman that Valkyrie had brought back to Doctor Strange's in an earlier issue, she rushes in to tell them that something is going on the television that they need to come see. And they rush in and they see that in Times Square, or wherever they are, I don't know if it's Times Square, it makes sense that it would be, the Sons of the Serpent have Valkyrie hanging upside down, crucified upside down on a cross, and they're about to burn her alive.
Yep.
The sight of this causes Bruce Banner to turn back into the Hulk. Hulk says, "Let Hulk through. Snake Men must not hurt Girl. Girl is Hulk's friend." And then they rush off, and we get... I love this panel, Brian. We get the panel of Daredevil swinging, the Hulk leaping, and Son of Satan with his chariot, with Luke Cage hanging from the chariot as it flies away.
And they arrive just in time, just as they're about to set fire to Valkyrie's cross.
And then, go ahead, sorry.
I love, once again, the humanization of the Hulk. As they're swooping down, Son of Satan and Luke Cage get swallowed up by this mysterious hole in thin air.
Right.
And Hulk's reaction is, Black Man and Fire Stick went away, but Girl needs them. Don't they care about Girl? It just, right. I love those moments, you know?
No, me too. I also love, by the way, Fire Stick. It's just a reminder that you have the Hulk and the Son of Satan on a team together. For some reason, that makes me laugh more than the Son of Satan with any of the other characters.
It does me too. So basically, you've got Daredevil and Hulk facing off against the Sons of the Serpent. Right. Daredevil gets overpowered. Hulk gets blinded.
Right.
And things look grim. The fire is set. The flames are creeping towards Valkyrie's cross. And that leads us into Defenders issue number 25.
Issue 25. And now we're getting a little late in the show, but we need to forge ahead, I think, and finish the Sons of the Serpent here.
I agree.
Written by Gerber, drawn by Sal Buscema, inked this time by Jack Abel, the legendary Jack Abel.
Yep.
And we begin with Clea, and we find out what happened to the Son of Satan and Luke Cage, which, again, similar to the Hulk and Son of Satan, Luke Cage, and the Son of Satan make an interesting pair. And Clea has basically sent them through the ether somehow because Doctor Strange has started to wake up. And somehow she manages to transport them so that they go through and come out the Eye of Agamotto. And I don't remember ever seeing that happen in any other comic.
I think this is the only time that's been used in a Marvel comic.
It's pretty damn cool, actually.
Yeah. And they materialize in the base at the floor of the Atlantic Ocean where Nighthawk and Doctor Strange are still being held prisoner.
Right.
And, of course, they make quick work of freeing them.
Yeah. So they free the rest of the Defenders. Then we have Nighthawk helpfully recapping for Yellow Jacket and the others. And, Son of Satan, interestingly, takes the lead here.
Yeah.
Because Doctor Strange is still too weak to teleport us back to the surface. They go down in Yellow Jacket's like, look, I tried this already. We're under the ocean. We can't get out of here. These walls are all identical. They're too thick. There must be a tunnel somewhere, but it's impossible to find it. And I love this. Yellow Jacket says they're too thick to sound out a tunnel without special instrumentation. And because nobody knows what the hell Damon Hellstrom's powers are, Hellstrom goes, I am employing such equipment, Dr. Pym, of my own sort. And then he senses that the tunnel is there, and he uses his Hellfire trident to burn through the wall and find the exit.
I know I'm getting way ahead of ourselves here, but when we get to J.M. DeMatteis's run on the Defenders, I want to ask him if he read these in their initial publication, because so much of the Son of Satan's character here, the way he kind of takes the lead and takes over as the leader of the Defenders,
right?
With Doctor Strange still recuperating, so much of that informs what DeMatteis does with the Son of Satan later in the Defenders,
right?
I wonder, I wonder if he took his lead from Gerber here.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to ask him that question.
Yeah, it will.
Anyway, they come out, and this again to sort of put the capper on the conversation about the pertinence of this storyline. You come out, and the Sons of the Serpent are around, and they're still attempting to set Valkyrie on fire after all this time. A crowd has gathered. A crowd had probably gathered before, and They're about to burn Valkyrie alive. None of the defenders, Hulk is still blinded. Daredevil starts to wake up, but it's basically too late. Jack Norris rushes from the crowd and throttles the son of Serpent who's about to burn his wife alive, or the woman he believes is his wife alive.
Right.
And that inspires a street full of, and again, let's make this clear from the art, a street full of white people.
Right.
His action touches a nerve in the citizens massed along the sidewalk.
Are we gonna talk about the dialogue between those upstanding white citizens?
Yep, we are. What they see is not a husband driven to protect his wife, but simply a man like them themselves with no special powers who's willing to defy the Serpent's brutality. And if he can do it, then we get this dialogue. And man, and I hate to say it this way, Brian, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying it this way.
No, if you want me to read it, I will. I mean, half the internet.
No. You can read it, but let me say my feeling about it, and then you can read the dialogue. To me, right here, this is where America's falling apart because we have this weird situation in this, which you're about to read, is these are sort of generic everyday white people who are aware that they're racist and are kind of not sure that they have a problem with people being violent toward people of color. But then they kind of remember that this country is not supposed to allow that stuff to happen. And we're sort of we're unraveling as a country because once upon a time the people who were, and again, I'm not justifying racism in any form at all. If you're racist, fuck off. But there was once a time where people who were casually racist felt like maybe it was a bad idea and like, I don't know, or some anyway. I don't know.
These are the voters who last November said,
yes,
I'm not racist.
Right.
I don't care what Trump said. I'm voting for him for these other reasons.
Yes, exactly.
Because
so go ahead. Read this wonderful dialogue.
Yeah. And now keep in mind, all of these speakers are white characters. The first one says to the rest of the crowd, "What's the matter with us? I mean, I got no love for the blacks, but..." And it's actually spelled like that. He was going to use the N-word, but, Steve Gerber wisely puts in the little ... Well,
I would go one step further with that before you read the reply, is I think it's also this guy going, oh, yeah, I'm not supposed to use that word.
Yeah.
Right? And again, and I'm not saying, listen, fuck these guys, okay? But I think it accurately represents a lot of people who are out there who are now, now thinking maybe marching in Charlottesville is a good idea.
Right.
So go ahead.
Then, the other guy says, right, you don't got to burn them alive just because you don't like them. Come on.
And that, and this
I know people like this in Pennsylvania.
I know.
This is why Pennsylvania voted the way it did. I know people. I've heard them at the grocery store and bar using this kind of reasoning.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, it's these people, some of whom voted for Barack Obama, but then later voted for Trump, because it's like, well, I hate people of color.
But you don't have to burn them alive.
But you should, right. I hate them, but you shouldn't burn them alive. That's a step too far. And I read that page. I'm like, Jesus, like, we have literally come no further. Like, we are not a step further. And all we've done is expose that recently. But in any case, back to unreality of comic books.
It's now Daredevil and Jack Norris.
Right.
I want to point out to folks, you keep in mind, Jack Norris he's not a superhero. He's just a civilian. But time and time again throughout Gerber's run, we're going to see him become officially another member of the Defenders.
Right.
And then suddenly Hulk gets his eyesight back. So now it's Daredevil, Jack, and Hulk, and they rescue Valkyrie. They get her down.
Right.
Then we go back to the Sons of the Serpent's base on the ocean floor.
Right. And our friends are escaping, and they find the tunnel. They climb up a ladder, and to make it very plain at this point, we discover that the person who has been organizing the Sons of the Serpent up until this time is indeed J.C. Pennyworth, the financial advisor to Kyle Richmond.
Right. To put a fine point on that, Kyle Richmond, a.k.a. Nighthawk, it has been his money that is financing this racist terrorist organization.
Right.
He didn't know this. It was Pennyworth doing it with his money. But, yeah.
All right. So Brian, we'll take a moment here, and we'll talk about this more in future issues. We'll take a moment here to acknowledge that there is, in the middle of this issue, a single page that has nothing to do with anything else.
That's right, folks. We travel from New York City to a mobile home park in the woodlands of California, where we meet Tom Pritchett and his wife, Linda. Now, Tom is playing guitar, doing his best cover of a John Denver song, and there's a knock on the door. And Tom goes to the door, and there's an elf with a gun.
Well, and it's in the dialogue too. We should say the elf says, "Tell her, Tom," and Tom says, "Linda, you're going to think I'm crackers, but there's an elf at the door, an elf with a gun."
Blam!
And just like every other appearance of the elf with a gun, the final panel on the page is just blam.
Yep. Now, if you're wondering why Chris and I are freaking out, you have just been introduced to absolutely the most bizarre member of the Defenders Rogues Gallery. I mean, this guy makes the Headmen look normal. It makes Nebula and the Celestial Man look like Doctor Doom or Magneto. This is the elf with a gun.
We will come back to the elf with a gun in later episodes.
We will.
Anyway, and Brian, I don't want to discuss yet what we feel about the elf with a gun. We'll save that for later.
Okay.
To be succinct, the shocking thing about the next scene is that the defenders burst into the home of Pennyworth. Nighthawk unmasks himself to reveal that he is Kyle Richmond to Pennyworth, and we have Pennyworth revealed to us for the first time. Pennyworth is black.
Yep, that's the big reveal. Like we said earlier in this episode, up until this point in the Defenders comic, we had never seen Pennyworth.
Right, which tells me, fascinatingly, that Gerber's been planning this all along. The fact that Pennyworth had been kept in shadow, we'd seen him but only in silhouette, is that he's been planning this Sons of the Serpent story and what he wanted to say with it. For all of this time. And, frankly, I think that it's a bit of a silly reveal, that I don't think that Gerber or you or I understands race relations enough to I certainly would not use this as a plot device in 2017. The idea that it's been an African-American guy who's been bankrolling this white supremacist, violent race war group. But Gerber does it, and when it's revealed to the rest of the Defenders who Pennyworth is, suffice to say, Luke Cage is a little pissed.
A little bit.
And he smashes Pennyworth across the room. The other Defenders rush in to stop him from killing Pennyworth. So he basically says, there's no purpose in beating him, that he's done. But Cage says, but the other guys, they're out there. The Sons of the Serpent are out there, and we've got to defeat them.
And then we get this great, momentous occasion where
we've
got this Defenders lineup of Hulk, Nighthawk, Doctor Strange, Yellowjacket, Son of Satan, Daredevil, Luke Cage, and Valkyrie taking the final battle to the Sons of Serpent.
And the first time we've seen them all together in one panel.
Yep.
Yeah, which is great. We get a double-page splash, which Gerber uses to great effect in this instance. And why do I like this double-page splash so much, Brian? Because it means that instead of a 6-page broken-down fight scene, we get Gerber saying, this fight doesn't matter so much, let's just make it look pretty and be done with it.
Yep, this is Gerber testing the editorial boundaries and edicts.
Right.
And he gets away with it here.
Yep. And afterwards we get Hulk saying, Snake Men, don't get up. Hulk and friends win fight. Which I love. Then at the end, Valkyrie's trying to comfort Nighthawk, saying, look, this is not your fault. And of course, he's furious with himself because he should have been on top of this. He's taking responsibility because he was too busy doing nothing, being a playboy or a defender. And he's taking responsibility. And then we get this commentary, which wraps up the issue, Brian. Luke Cage says, funny, ain't it, how you figure a rich dude like him ain't got nothing to sweat. And Dr. Strange says, material wealth may liberate a man. I know, look, call me a fucking libtard. I don't care. Fuck off. Dr. Strange says, material wealth may liberate a man from some concerns, my friend, but never from all. Not if the man also possesses that quality called conscience.
Right.
And if that's not Gerber's final word on the topic, it certainly would serve as a great epitaph.
It would. So that wraps up the Sons of the Serpent saga. Next week, we should point out it's the beginning of another multi-part saga involving the Guardians of the Galaxy. Because once again, anybody and everybody can and will show up in the pages of the Defenders.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to me that I forgot that even happened.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to rereading those issues because up until I did read the Giant Size, but I haven't gone further. Up until I reread that Giant Size, I'd completely forgotten that it was more than a one-off. I'd forgotten that the Guardians of the Galaxy, that the storyline was an actual arc.
Well, and Gerber does something with it, and we'll talk about this more next week, but, Marvel had all these futuristic characters, Killraven,
yep,
and Guardians of the Galaxy, and Deathlock, and you weren't sure how they all fit together continuity-wise, and because this was Marvel, everything had to fit. And it is here in the pages of Defenders where Gerber actually makes all that stuff fit together. Right,
he creates the timeline that has all that stuff in it, and I have to say that even though it's not a story, just the fact that we have a glimpse of Killraven, one of my favorite Marvel characters, by the way, it goes back to anyone and everyone will show up in the Defenders at some point.
Right.
So.
Yep.
There you go.
We will also see on next week's show, if you're a fan of the Planet Hulk storyline or Thor Ragnarok, which is out in theaters this weekend, you're going to see where that whole thing originated from in next week's show. And once again, it was in the pages of the Defenders.
Cool. I think, Brian, that we're establishing, we need to wrap because we're way over time.
Yeah,
but I think we are establishing at this point that the Defenders may well be the most important comic in the history of Marvel Comics.
It is. All right. Well, since we are out of time, I'm going to skip a lot of the ending, but I do want to remind folks, Defenders Dialogue is available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and all other platforms via the Project Entertainment Network. If you are a patron, supporter, or subscriber, please consider checking out the Project Entertainment Network's patron page and perhaps supporting them so that they can continue to bring you quality shows like this one. Our engineer is Tommy Clark. You can check out Tommy's podcast right here on the Project Entertainment Network. It's called the Necrocasticon. And if you'd like to sponsor one of our upcoming episodes, you can do so. Send us an email, briankeene@live.com, and we will get you hooked up.
Excellent.
And Excelsior.
Excelsior, true believers.
See you next week.
The Necrocasticon, the podcast that blends horror and heavy metal properties with a common connection. Brought to you by hosts Token Tom Clock, Max Axe, Smoking Walt Hades, and Asriel Mordecai. Featuring interviews and more with the stars of metal and horror. the Necrocasticon, Mondays on Project Entertainment Network.
This has been an exclusive presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.